Hopefully the camera won't fall. This is the other video. The other one cut off. I didn't really have much to say. I was actually going to start this video. So, this is a post where it could be referenced to and against a post for some clarity, but I don't know how that will pan out. The post is called a 5D reality bridge. The idea, the real basic concept is that you have the dimensions, and a lot of people will call this theoretical, metaphysical, or even basically fantastical or imaginary, like it doesn't actually apply, but you have to kind of bear with it until it makes sense to you. That's how it works. You can't have the lower dimensions without the higher dimensions. It's just common sense, it's logic. And so we have the physical plane, the third dimension, what we call the third dimension, and we can't honestly exist in just the third dimension because we would be paper mache cutouts that basically don't move. The universe would be a freeze frame, like a silent film at that point. There would be no play to it. So we have at least some inclusion beyond 3 dimensions of space, which is then a motion, an extra dimensional variation in those dimensions, which give rise to extra space, which is basically time, which is where the objects within a confined space can move in reference to one another, which ultimately means that everything here is one 3-dimensional object, which is then entangling with itself in and out of itself through extra dimensions or higher dimensions of reference, where we get time. Instead of a bunch of objects moving through space, it's actually one complete like pop-up book, or like those old devices they would build where it's like the puppets come out on the little, whatever they're called, it's just like not wires, but it's like a hard metal wire or something. They come out and then they like dance around or something, and then like go back inside the house or something, like a kind of some of the cuckoo clocks where they would come around and then go back in. It's kind of like that's what it is, where everything's actually all connected to one continuous motion machine, and the illusion of separation and independent time and all that is it's a perceptual illusion basically generated out of the observer. And so it's the separation then is in the observer rather than the material or the mechanism. And so in that way, it's actually one giant object intertwined in and out of itself relatively to create the illusion of motion within itself. Whereas, say the whole universe you have, I'm getting off track here, but the whole, off track is kind of like a pun, the whole universe, as one system. Okay, so how do you measure motion of that whole system to, itself? It doesn't really make sense. So you have to have some type of simulation of such. And the idea that it's actually one object interacting with itself enables that simulation to play out, where separation is experienced but is not actual. Regardless, you have 3 dimensions of space which encompass the matter, the materials, in the physical aspect, and then that space has to have shimmy room, if you will, from an extra dimensional aspect in order to promulgate. Wow, I just skewered a word. In order to, let me look that up. Promulgate. Okay, that's not really the proper word there. In order to, that's definitely not the word. That word doesn't mean what I thought it meant. In order to create the possibility of such motion beyond just that space there as it is. And so the idea is that another idea, I'm still dragging this on, is instead of being 4-dimensionally active, you can imagine that the 4th-dimensional perception is the notion of the possibilities around the physical limitations, the definition of the physical material universe. And we don't have the view of time. We're not like time beings. I mean, we can be and we are, but that's not the general idea. from where we're coming from mainstream reality, if you will. People don't know what they're going to do tomorrow. So instead of saying, we're four-dimensionally active, we have 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, most people are 3.2, maybe 3.5 dimensionally active, where they're only...
You got a lighter I can use?
No, I don't. Where they are 0.2 or 3.5 dimensionally active, where they have a limited spectrum, a limited perception of the extra dimension of time and therefore the possibilities. In other words, people only have access to the possibilities that they can attain mentally, and mentally people aren't actually acquiring a large enough realm of possibilities in this four-dimensional or mental aspect to basically be considered beyond at least midway between physical and temporally aware existence. It's almost like an illusion, a limbo point between true awareness of this four-dimensional aspect, this mentality, and having no awareness of it at all, as if it's an automation. For instance, without the true observer aspect, the universe is then a cuckoo clock where everything just happens according to a mechanism of gears inside, and the observer aspect is not there, it's not real, it's an illusion. The cuckoo clock that, comes out and yells at you at a certain hour, it's not actually yelling at you, no one's actually there. That's the whole point. But if that observer aspect is present, then the whole system becomes that, but it's not, instead of an automation system with the being an automaton, it is a person, an actual being inside that system, where they are basically moving and experiencing the change, and through this given an opportunity, if you will, to experience reality from a higher perspective, where free will is actually enabled through the ability to literally create those tracks of time that one's experience moves around on and through. And so another, like, remodeling the cuckoo clock. But without that, which is, I term, the soul level of awareness, which is what a lot of people will or do, it's just an automaton system, and the people aren't engaging. They're engaging by going 3 o'clock or 12 o'clock, and they think that's them. That's free will. That's not free will. That's the program running. That's the biological consciousness, the gears that are connected in here, connected to the external stimuli in the perceptual system. Just it's all one system. What happens out here happens in there, and there's no self-control there. There's no free will. The only thing that's free in that point is the act of the observer. So then, with a actual, application of free will, it's the ability to basically stem that process and do nothing. And, it's 12 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, nothing happens. And they're like, where is he or her? And the guy's just sitting there meditating. Okay, that's the kind of idea. Or to then remodel the track of time and recreate as if the internal being has the power of the external being that would have to have crafted that clock system to begin with. And so those are two kind of standpoints, or test points maybe, to kind of internally verify. And through thought experiments, and it's individual, because you're not going to really get to a point. By the time you get to the point where they bust out machines and they're like, here, yeah, it's dimensional awareness, blah, 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 you already figured it out on your own. No one's going to come do it for you. As well, that would be killing you, because then you would never have the chance ever in the universe to actually figure it out on your own. They have to wipe your memory and send you back so you can figure it out. The act of figuring it out is the act of liberating one's awareness from that predetermined track of time and consciousness or experience. And so without that soul awareness, one is a lower dimensional entity, is essentially an animal. And so we're kind of in between, according to this, the dimensions, and not fully in a temporal transition or transitory awareness where we can basically view the possibilities and through willpower select which one we want. Most people either have some aspect of this kind of animalistic, predetermined response pattern behavior running, or they have some and a little bit of the free will in time running. But if a person ever goes completely animal, it's like they're, like a robot or something, which is going on. And if a person ever goes completely absolute control over time and consciousness, well, they're not really like a person anymore. They don't correspond to the same limitations of experience. They can sit there and think in their mind and travel to different times. So that's where this is going. So you have that three-dimensional object, which is defined by those 3 dimensions of space. Then you have the 4th dimension as an overlay of mind or consciousness, whereby the person can access the possibilities that exist directly. Say this is the 3rd-dimensional body right here. The 3rd-dimensional body, the physical point, it's the seed planet. You've heard that before. Okay, that means that in the dimensional spectrum, that is the anchor through which other experiences will be brought about. You're not going to, you have a Monday night, say this is a bowl of pasta or something, and then immediately after that, you're like swimming in the ocean or something. That doesn't make sense. It's one is relative to the next, and that's how binary, physical, linear experience works. But as well, if you're going to go from one event or another into another expanse, another possibility using the mind, well, it starts with that physical environment first. And so this is the 3-dimensional seed, or the 3-dimensional body or object or physical reality or temporal linear time. So then directly outside of this, you'll have events and objects, or you have objects and situational, circumstantial factors, variables, and that's physical. But then metaphysically or conceptually, basically imagining it if it's a virtual reality, and so you have those objects programmed into the like the environment schematic. I don't really know the words for that. And so then along with those that code that programs those props in the environment, you'll have a category of other possible variations of those props, if you will. And so conceptually then, you have the events and the physical layout, but conceptually you have possibilities that are enabled through a proximal reference of objects or basically variables. That's all it is. It's like a simulator that are present within the environment. Meaning, if you're sitting in your living room on the sofa, due to that proximity in your physical environment, there is a temporal proximity in possibilities or in the code, whatever you want to look at it as, of you checking YouTube. I was going to say turn on TV, but nobody wants to do that anymore. So your living room where your computer is. Then there directly around that, there are a set of possibilities, a set of probabilities that will be the next moment of experience. And so what's around you physically is going to basically lead into those possibilities. That is the 4th dimension, where you have a set of possibilities that you can access via the mind of consciousness, and you can look to see what's the most likely event that's going to occur, and you can choose what, where, when, why, and how you want to shape your experience from there on through consciousness. And with low consciousness, it's an automaton. Basically, the same cycles occur, and it's according to a kind of repeating pattern, belief system based, as well perceptual system, and neurochemical desire basically based system of the brain, literally kind of like a biological robot, where whatever the desires, the repeating habits, whatever the stimuli externally and through more or less through childhood and that personality, the ego upbringing, whatever that dictates is going to happens. And that's lowest consciousness. Then as we go higher, we get more and more control over what's going to happen next, and which of those possibilities in the environment as well as in the mind, basically the code of the schematic, the schema, will be interacted with, activated, enabled, or whatever, focused on in order to lead into the next situation. And so the part with the code is kind of important, because you could have a bottle of coffee, tomato jar, and a tea, what are they called? The French press. There's another word for it. And so then imagine, I'm lower consciousness. I'm just going to say, well, I could get a drink. They're almost all drinks, but I could get a drink, or I could have some, something to eat, some pasta or something like that. Now, if you have access to the database, the bank of codes, whereas you can access the categories that these variables come from, whereas in another reality, they could be a lemonade drink, instead of a coffee press, I don't know, a fruit of some sort, and instead of a bottle of coffee, a bottle of, some type of other tea or something like that. And so that's not present here. But say I look using consciousness and connect with those possibilities by basically not really deciphering, but expanding on the possibilities and drawing them down to the source of what the base motivation, the base possibility is enabled. For instance, they're all, what I've labeled is all basically relative to drinking or food or something like that. Then you can go to the categories of that and replace these and have different responses. And so that's not going to literally change this into a fruit drink or something, or a different type of tea. But I can organize from a probability set where that isn't present, me going out and finding that based upon something similar, or I can organize a reaction where, say this is, say it's like water, and I want something as enjoyable as tea or some type of fruit smoothie or something like that. I could literally, it would be messing with yourself to a degree. Everything is messing with ourselves, but I can initiate a response where I am as appreciative of this bottle of water as I would be had it have been a smoothie or tea drink or something like that. And so at that point you can deviate from that pre-programmed response, and that might be silly, like, well, why would I care about that? Well, if you have something that's causing suffering in your life, you can deviate from that continuous repetitive response and gain control through the observing of the possibilities through that. And so in the lower ability, one will only have the lower consciousness, one will only have the ability of seeing what's immediately proximal to themselves physically and therefore temporally through the mind. And that the observer, the identity, the experiencing self will only align with, the reactions, the responses. They will only enable the options. If it's like a choose your own adventure storybook or one of those online text games that are from the 80s, they'll only see that basic list. For instance, you in those text games, look them up. Younger people probably aren't aware of those. But they're just text games online where you type like look around and it gives you the scene, the environment, like in a creek or a dark alleyway in a haunted manor or something like that. And then it says there's a door to the right, to the left, and so on and so forth. And you can check the directions and whatever. So, and there'll be objects that you could pick up or something like that. It's basically a game, but it's all through text. And it's interactive. You have to look for stuff and you have to select them through text manually, intentionally, instead of just... It's the same with the physical environment, but it's more interactive in a different way. The idea is, the example here is that a person with lower consciousness will only type the one look around command, and they'll get the 5 basic things. There's a door there, there's a, creepy water dripping down the wall here, and then there's like a sword over there. Then the person who has a more in-depth view, more self-awareness, and therefore a more detailed consciousness, a more powerful consciousness, that's really all it is, will have the look around command as well as the figure out why that water's leaking, what objects is behind the crates over there, what's in the corner that way, what is out the window that way. They'll have the details of all these other aspects which are not in the perceptual boundaries of a person who is not basically being aware and paying attention to these possibilities. And it comes down to a lot of creativity. Because it's simply just what's out there. In any situation, anything can happen for the most part, according to your ability and consciousness. For instance, I could sit here and make out of this situation any type of production internally that could be as active as something that occurs out in nature when, say, on a deep hike or something, If I wanted to, I could go within and create the same state and say I'm out there and I'm responding to my environment and responding to my own self-awareness in this heightened manner. Well, if I have control, then I can do that here now, even though nothing is here in the environment. That means I'm pulling that out of the environment. I'm coding that in, if you will, by synchronizing the self I am here and now with the self that would be there and attributing myself, my responses to that self, which is part of reality generation, creation. And when you do that, it goes beyond the fourth. But the fourth is basically everything that leads right into it. The fourth is basically everything that's proximal to the physical sense. Now, the reality where I'm out in the woods hiking, where, you know, say this is me, or just say this example right here, I'm in the room, that's not occurring right now. In a nearly infinite universe, that is occurring. If I did it once before, that's still there. It's imprinted in my DNA. And if I'm going to do it in the future sometime, that's a big secret. It's just about synchronization. But before getting too far ahead or too, you know, strange, the idea is that the responses that I could, you know, attribute myself to and go within and pull out the same intensity of experience and engagement through observation and intention of interacting with the environment as if I'm in a type of deeply connected state that I would be in, say, in a hike or in some, you know, park somewhere or in some different environment where that is more relative, that's not four-dimensionally present. Say I'm talking about some place in 1,000 miles away, 3,000 miles away, and it's a specific location, a specific vibe I would be feeling, okay? Say I've been there before or something like that. Okay, that's not four-dimensionally present. Say it's outside in the woods, like literally right over there. Alright, that's four-dimensionally present. Why? Because from this physical standpoint, this literal perspective, this anchor seed point, all I have to do is go look around, find the door, go through the door, go down the stairs, go open the other door, go walk across the field, blah, blah. If it's a one of those games, the commands are right there. Simple. If it's reality, I can conceive mentally, I can creatively conceive how to get there. It's not very hard. It's not difficult. So four-dimensionally, I have access to that reality. It's right there. Now, say it's 3,000 miles away, and I, you know, say there's something that I have no way of getting there tonight or you know, relatively any time to achieve what I'm actually imagining. Then that doesn't exist in a four-dimensional aspect. The experience and the self that I would embody doesn't exist in a four-dimensional aspect. It's not connected, wherever that is, through a four-dimensional pattern of mental acquiring of the steps that are required to get there. There are no steps. Any combination of four-dimensional steps, meaning go play the lottery, go run as fast as I can for like 7 days, and then swim when I get to the ocean. Go stick my thumb out and just be like, anybody want to fly me across, you know, drive me across the country and go to the blah, blah. There's no viable option, according to, you know, general consensus, if you will, that I could intend to initiate using my mind that would take me there right now. So, but the idea is that the possibility still exists. Because it exists beyond the fourth dimensional grasp of the situation, this fourth dimensional consciousness assessment or a capacity to see the possibilities or to attain the possibilities or a pathway to them mentally. And so this is basically, that's the beginning of the fifth dimensional aspect, to the point where if you don't have a physical four-dimensional link between the present moment now physically to the present moment there, and it's still happening, it's still something that can happen, okay, that means it's operating through the fifth dimensional link. It's basically like a, you know, hypercube where you have it can turn inside out in ways that a regular cube cannot, and that's because the programming of that square cube, that physical shape, say, and I think I've mentioned this before, actually I've written about this, say it is like you've seen the visuals of them turning, or any object that does that. In the program, you know, if you have a three-dimensional like physics engine and that's occurring, then momentarily or within the entire transition, where the parameters of the shape, the literal measurement values, are violating what would normally be a three-dimensional consistency, they would be considered to be operating in a four-dimensional manner, where they're going outside the physical continuity platform and they're operating in the fourth dimension. Imagine if it's like Pac-Man, he goes to the side of the screen and then pops up over here. The point is, here's the three dimensions, here's the three dimension, where he is here and here is four-dimensional, and it's looping around through space, meaning it's flat here from inside, but from an outside, larger four-dimensional perspective, it's actually a looped circle to the point where it's all just connected. Like a Mobius strip, or, well, really not a Mobius strip, but basically a spherical type of continuum. But the idea is, from three-dimensional perspective, it doesn't look like it's spherical. That's because it's not, it's flat, and it's momentarily bridging through extra dimensional space, a higher space, in order to basically create a motion which violates the lower three-dimensional continuum. And so the same thing happens here, where we attain levels of awareness or experience that are not consciously, basically four-dimensionally, not verifiable, but achievable in the sense of using like a step and ladder, basically, way of physically punching in the variables and consciously like walking there, basically. And so this is the beginning of attaining states and attaining awareness that is beyond this physical dimension, and more so the limitations of a consciousness limited to just the physical body, just the physical dimension, in terms of the immediately proximal possibilities in the fourth dimension immediately around that one physical object, meaning those props and those categories of props that are relative physically. And so beyond those physically relative ones, there are still variables and categories, and those are five-dimensionally present. Meaning, so here's the idea behind that. If it's not physically that you come up with a platform that you're physically going to walk to in order to attain that, like say I want pineapple juice, well, I could go to the store. Say I don't want to go to the store right now, well, then that's not going to happen, but I still have that possibility there. Now say I want, I don't even know, something that would be, I'd have to basically invent in order to get pineapple, watermelon, plum, banana, orange juice. Something that's not in the stores. Okay, there's no immediate four-dimensional capability for me to go out and find this or produce it right now, because I don't have those in my parameter set, prop set, in the capacity. And so say, and this is an example though, because the idea is that from the five-dimensional perspective, what we use this for, or what this is relative to, is the awakening of the self to the possibilities of who you can be in terms of your awareness levels that go beyond the stimulus of the environment. So, the previous example, which is a bad example, I would have to intend through focused awareness to link up to basically make this juice. And all that would entail is finding the proper, fruits, and finding people or a facility or whatever it is that can enable this. And so the idea is, given, 6 months, whatever, of focusing on this enough, I might find the right people that have access to the right things. Or I could just, in a couple weeks, ship all the ingredients to me from a, farm fresh location or something like that, and get the quality and the exact, the idea that I'm looking for. That wasn't previously relative in any proximal sense. And so the idea is, I would have to use imagination to attain that. I couldn't walk somewhere and press a bunch of levers and buttons and get it. Maybe you have a lot of money, or you live in, Hawaii or something like that. It's a lot easier. But I'm specifically picking something that's out of bounds, because that's the idea. The idea is that the fifth dimensional perspective is there to build a bridge between the where we are here and the out of bounds perspective, or end result, if you will, that goes beyond space and time as connected to this seed platform of the physical body, self-consciousness, and basically linear biological consciousness, and the universe connected to that. Meaning, what exists in the physical fifth dimension is not a crazy drink we can never come up with. It's that which exists outside the physical universe, because no time and space, no configuration of events, no configuration of intentions, or variables, or enabling of different parameters will actually enable it. Yet if you can imagine it and create that to the degree where you basically synchronize the you here with the you there, then you basically you build a bridge between it. The frequency that you synchronize with, and the responses, the ins and outs, the focus, the perception, synchronizes with the one that's over there. So the main idea here is, it's not, okay, we have jetpacks or something like that, like I'm going to synchronize with it and get that. It's the idea that it is healing, that you can synchronize with the self, the version of you who has consciousness at a high enough level where pure awareness basically enables the properties, the props, parameters of your environment to go beyond what is physically verifiable. And it's not, again, for the main idea is it's not for material things. It's the idea that you can then take your internal experience, your level of enjoyment, basically, your level of healing beyond the limitations of the physical environment and basically what you do and don't have, and the binary automation style perceptual systems, the illusions, and the stimuli, input, output, and these perceptual subconscious programs that are basically aggregated through indoctrination from our childhood and living in this kind of society where it's pretty prevalent to tell people what to think versus let them, decide for themselves. And that's the main idea. So this comes into play not where you want it to come into play. It comes into play where it is necessary, meaning the reality where the you exists, where the way you perceive yourself, life, and the universe, and it's not perceiving because it goes back to perception, it goes back to biological consciousness, it goes back to an illusory virtual reality system we have in our heads, but the way we are self-aware and the ability to observe goes beyond the limits of this type of control system of indoctrination we seem to be in. That's where you connect with that version of you through the fifth dimension, beyond the directly proximal parameters and possibilities that are enabled through consciousness in the fourth dimensional aspect, which is limited by what's directly around us perceptually and physically. And it's just how it works that, why can't you enable the version of yourself that goes beyond this system and is present, maximally in a healed fashion through the fourth dimension? Technically, you could if you had the opportunity. Meaning, say you had all the perfect ingredients, harmony, wholeness, etc., so on and so forth, and it was all here in this moment and directly outside of this moment, meaning you just press a button, you go there. But the idea is, where the fourth dimension expands to is physical consciousness. It's mental consciousness. It's temporal consciousness. And right outside the perceptions that we can't see, that are still relative to this physical reality dimension, meaning it's not personally relative to us, but it's still relative to the physical world, what's going on here. They have reality grids, matrices set up where some guy or some being and some device is sitting there programming in the possibilities, the props, the boundary limits for consciousness attainment of these possible probable realities, where it's basically like a trap system that they program in these traps to the point where if you do attain it through the fourth dimensional aspect and kind of deviate just off the fifth physical plane into that consciousness level and achieve higher consciousness, eventually you're going to run into these trap systems, and they try and basically bring people back down. They're technological systems that they devised for this, as well as beings who sit there and that's all they do, is they sit there and wait just out of the perceptual plane, the limit of the physical dimension and biological consciousness and all that perceptual boundary, and they sit and wait for people to begin to navigate out using those limits or possibilities that are right outside the directly viable physical limits before it gets to the fifth dimension, which you would call that, and they sit there and the boundary between them and wait. And that's like the astral void space. They wait and they wait, and they more or less eat people's energy, and they attack their souls. And so they kind of put a lockdown on the realm, the planet, to the point where it's, you could go out and just sit there, and by nature of automation, by nature of stimuli, by nature of letting consciousness of the body, biological consciousness and lower awareness, do what it does and slowly aggregate up to the higher levels. And that would take usually lots of time, because once you have that free will and you snap on, you realize you can do anything as long as this is like a bum of a situation. Well, imagine you can be brilliantly self-aware and inviting of the highest potentials. Okay, well, once you have free will to do that, nothing holds you back. And the idea is, though, before that, it could occur eventually, naturally, but in this situation they have these big reality grids set up where they're beings holding themselves in a fourth dimensional perspective outside of the physical plane of reference, just outside of the possibilities, waiting there in between them and the fifth dimension. They don't have access to the fifth dimension because the fifth dimension is bridged between the physical and the fifth dimension through imagination and focused belief, maybe not belief, but focused intent. And therefore there's a creative aspect, meaning it is literally created by an observer, by a living observer aspect, an agent. And that's every fifth dimensional bridge, if you will, has to be created from this perspective up to there. And at least there can be a fifth dimensional bridge coming down from others in that perspective, coming to a person, you know, like a shining light of glory or something. But that person must be opening their mind and their reality, and more so their awareness, to the possibilities where the ensuing result or the resulting outcome of that connection, that bridge, is possible. Meaning, if, you know, you're about to basically kick the bucket and there's no water, you're out in the desert, there's no real reason, possibility, notion, variable, probability, whatever, that you're going to make it, well, you'd have to believe with intent, you'd have to imagine, creatively, form the connection of that possibility that something will occur. And, you know, with enough intent, don't go out into the desert or anything and test this out. Although when you get into your situation in life, if you go far enough and you are in one of those situations and you know this and you apply this, it will work. That's just what it is. And so, if you believe, then something will happen. That's the basis for a miracle, where something outside the parameter set of, if this was like a simulated realm with a certain amount of programmed responses and possibilities, with enough of that intent and focused awareness, and in that sense also unfocused, because if you're always, you're thinking like, I need to get out of here, I need something, blah, blah, well, you're focusing on what you need, and needing the fact that you need it, and that's not being open to the possibilities. So it's about this allowing, which is very paradoxical, because it's kind of like a non-dual state of awareness, which does not seek to achieve that which it achieves by definition. It's real weird, but that's the difference between consciousness and awareness, where you don't have to be consciously engaged in the process, but your awareness, you have to be aware of it. There's a difference. There's awareness is subtle, kind of like it's within, its energy, its essence. Consciousness is a thought process. It has words and notions and values and measurements and contrasts to bring about one thought to the next. So it's not so much about thinking, although there are pathways to that, but they also lead through the fourth dimension with these sigils and entanglements and consciousness bridges and things like that. And a lot of these are basically closed off, and they lead to hell realms because it's all been taken over. Whereas the idea, then, the staple of this is through pure intent, self-awareness, pure awareness, and willingness, basically producing a powerful will, but without literally thinking what you're trying to outline, because then that collapses that immense probability or possibility stream down into those four-dimensionally relative possibilities and probabilities that are then relative to the mind and consciousness, which is, it's going to narrow it down, and it collapses that process. And so, but the main idea of the connection with this is that through the intent and the awareness, there's some type of connection with what we call the heart, which the way it was explained is actually is what is the convergence point of man, where our energy kind of goes like that in two bubbles, and there's like a vortex point right in the center, and that's some type of convergence point. And it's literally like a 0-point synchronization field where we can experience empathy and literally detect what's happening in someone else's 0-point reference field right next to us or a million miles away. Meaning whatever's happening there violates that three-dimensional aspect of space and time and consciousness. And that's kind of why I unconsciously, unwittingly, but I knew there was some reason, some connection. I was aware of some desire to connect the two concepts, but that is where there's some type of ability to connect with you, the you here, physically relative, stuck in space-time, if you will, and something that's far off outside the confines of this three-dimensional, temporally limited biological experience. Something within that convergence point which connects every person regardless of the laws of physics, and a person, that same concept connects them regardless of the laws of physics to a possible version of themselves, and therefore a reality that they, whatever you can imagine, whatever you hold there and intend and focus on, you begin to synchronize with. And so the two begin to bridge at that point, and that's kind of like the basis of it. Where this connects to in more specificity is that we're not going to find a four-dimensional pathway out of the situation on Earth. We're there are no four-dimensional pathways. They're all locked up and they go to dungeons in hell. It's just how it is. In other words, we're in the desert right now. Water's gone, food's gone, and lightning storms are coming, and earthquakes, fire, and all that. The only thing that can get us out of this is that focused intent within the 0 point, convergence heart center of beings, man and woman, and synchronizing that with the highest potential, highest possible reality by synchronizing our input, output, our responses, basically our presence of self. Because it's not input, output, because it's not binary consciousness, it's not biological consciousness. You don't do it, then you do something, you put a funny hat on, and you go over here and you do this ritual or this aspect of this. It's continuous. It's one continuous thing without break. So it's basically holding the potential within yourself, and that's just simply highest self-awareness. Not giving in to the programs that come externally from these control mechanisms or the brain and body or other beings, whether they're lower dimensional or some person or whatever, that basically put their will on us, trying to replicate us, creating an imposter imitator version of the ego, of the holographic reflection of the universe within, to reflect that imbalanced version out here, and not allowing that to dictate what's going to happen next, how we're going to feel, what energies we're going to focus on, and what possibilities, probabilities in that little reality matrix, text, choose your own adventure, or simulator game, whatever you want to call it, which ones we're going to click, and which ones we're going to access, which ones we're going to enable, which then branch in time and equate or lead into the next temporal moment, the next scene, the next page. And the interesting thing is, because it's non-physical, it's not really about attaining objects. You can do that. That's the whole point. You can do that. That's what a lot of what they did to get, the wealth of the world. The idea is it's for basically finding salvation out of a type of dead-end physical construct, fractal holographic infected system, and merging with, through building a bridge to a reality beyond the confines of this physical dimension, and as well linear time and space. Basically, the concept is that you can't physically or consciously get there on a linear platform. You'll just go and go and go forever. What has to happen is a 5D branch, just like the cube, momentarily going, if it's a square, that's a square, then it turns into a hypercube and folds inside out. Well, for that, and then it's just a regular square again, or a box, excuse me, or cube. For the moment that it went like that, it's operating transdimensionally in 4D space. And just like the Pac-Man thing that momentarily jumps around from 4D space to the other. Now I lost my place. So it's not linear, and it would be as if we go, and then instead of branching endlessly, we literally disappear, poof, and then pop up on another stream, another timeline, whatever you want to call it. And in that in-between is 5-dimensional space, or what is known as a 5-dimensional bridge, where time-space in the higher dimensions, and it's not time-space at that point, it's time-space, it's extra-dimensional space, it's hyperspace, it's not time-space. Time-space is below. It's like saying the cube space is what it goes into when it folds inside out in 4 dimension. No, it doesn't. It goes into hyperspace from the cube's perspective of space. And so, but it would be as if those realities bent together in a way that violates the equilibrium, and more, it's not the equilibrium, but the continuity perceived from the lower dimensions, which is not disrupting anything. It's going beyond the confines of the limitations of that system, which is not, you're not breaking anything, you're not breaking any laws. At that point, if you do it for your own personal, wealth, if you will, and it's a measure of insecurity, because there's really no reason to do that unless you are insecure and you want more material things versus, what that could be used for, which is something more eternal and lasting and knowledge and harmonious and stuff like that. then that's going to come back, because it's going to lead back into the same circumstances that necessitated the requirement of such a shift in the first place. It's going to cause a person to drop back down in the dimensional layers of frequencies, because the possibilities, then the creativity is going to drop down. The more a person steals and cheats and feeds themselves, the less creative they become on how they can experience life without having to do those things. Okay, that's the whole point. The more, these people do that, and that's part of what this is all about, that we can help, we can assist in the people who are more or less trapped because they've been spending their time keeping people down. Sounds kind of like a bite me type of thing to say, but that, for instance, is the least automaton related, least predictable, least reactive, least binary consciousness, programmable, lower, animalistic behavior type of thing to do. The dog-eat-dog thing to do would be to go punch them in their face and try and fly across that rainbow bridge. But guess what? That's not going to happen, because it's a measure of an insecurity to want to do that, to want to take revenge. That's all it is. To want revenge is a measure of insecurity. To want to not let this ever happen again, that's just intelligence. That's just being aware. It's like, ow, that hurts. Okay, don't do that again. To go and burn the person's house down, it's insecurity. That's what it is. It's a part of that weakness in the individual that was victimized. So that won't happen in a way that leads us out of here. That's the whole point. That's what I'm trying to say. And eventually, the parameters that have been played out over and over again, they lead into the same thing. When we hold that space within, and it's the highest potential, where we are then beyond all that predictable nonsense, all that binary cause and effect, all the programmed lower animalistic behavioral patterns. When we do that to the highest potential, then a 5D bridge opens up, and this society merges with the version of all of us that basically never had this problem, which is the strangest way to describe it and to outline it, but that's more or less the idea. Now, will that happen in the sense of everybody goes to sleep and wakes up in another place? It could. That's how a lot of things are done. Will that be a waking event? That's how it was explained at certain times for me, that it's the first time it happens while everyone's awake. For instance, time has stopped, there's been resets, there's been galactic battles in front of everyone's faces, and they just turn back time, or they reset everyone's consciousness, everybody forgets it. And unless you've been in and out of these these physical states into higher dimensions, you wouldn't know. But if you had, then you remember, and you're just like wondering why nobody says anything the next day or something like that. But so the idea of this ultimate transition, this exodus, this return, this event, this awakening, apocalypse, unveiling, is that this, for the first time ever, it'll happen plain day, plain sight for everyone to see. Which is also that it's going to be the crunch time where everyone's going to decide they're going to go this way or they're going to go that way. But if the people have a core, just like a body, just like a consciousness of an individual, just like a family, if the core of humanity has a family, the family of humanity has a cure, and it is a cure. It's a cure for the infection of binary hate, fear-based consciousness experience. It's a cure. But if the core of humanity has that, the family of humanity has that core of integral, connected people who are focusing on their highest potential outside of that non-creative, reactive, revenge-based, animalistic consciousness, basically the highest form of creativity, barring the creativity that created this whole experience and beyond, then it will hold together. And it'll be like a whirlpool, a swirling of possibilities, where everybody looks and sees that that central core is the basis for what is happening, that is centralizing around that. And anyone who, goes with that, they'll be drawn to it naturally. Everyone who has the soul, the capacity to be aware, and even apparently the humans that do not have soul level awareness, meaning they're just kind of like, they're human, they're conscious, but they're just kind of like blah, and a lot of it is like angsty and animalistic and desire based and stuff like that, that if they simply look in that direction and see what's going on, they'll have the opportunity to begin to inch their way in that whirlpool of increasing awareness of that core group, and it'll begin to activate their soul level awareness in response, basically. It's a piece of garbanzo bean. And so that's the basis. Kind of outlined a lot more about also what is projected to occur. It's not projected, it happens every universe. It's just, that's the exit, that's the entrance. Whenever we come around to it, that's how it works. We build a bridge using our consciousness, or more so our awareness, because right now we're using consciousness and it's just a repeating pattern. and it's hijackable. It's easily hijackable. All you need is a couple scalar devices, or drugs, or scary stories, or desires, temptations, whatever it is. You can hijack a person's consciousness. That's how it works. If a person is spooked into a certain response, you might not think, well, they got hijacked, versus if some guy has a beam and he's like, go over there, and the person walks that way. But it's the same thing. If you can take over the world with words and images, it's the same thing. And that's consciousness, biological consciousness. Awareness can't be changed. You can't, you got an orange in your hand, and you're like, do not be aware of this orange. It doesn't exist. It's not going to work. The more you do that, the more they're aware of it. That's the whole point. Now, you can, in a way, distract them. Let's say you have an apple in the other hand, but, and that's possible. But imagine then the orange is that which they are using to perceive reality with, instead of something outside them, but it's themselves. You can consciously get them to focus on other things, but the awareness that's being present in the moment to be conscious of those other things, it can never really go away. We can just get entangled in this consciousness, like schema hall of mirrors. We're focused on so many external things that we're not really utilizing awareness to the point where we're self-aware. We're aware of our own awareness. And that's kind of the idea. You can't remove it, but you can make people forget about it momentarily. And so all that is a downhill kind of trend, which with these events that push people to, going along with what I said in the previous video, to purge or uncover or activate these corrupt elements of DNA and consciousness that are inputted from the past, from these past events, that it goes one way or another. It's like tipping the scales at that point. And as these individuals begin to input into reality the self-awareness, the compassion, the truth, the honesty, the free will, the knowledge of the self, the basically that's it. The basic staples, the principles of the human soul, and the existence here versus the stuff we have here that we can play with. It has nothing to do with anything. It's debris. The internal aspect of that, those are props. The internal aspect is a self-observation aspect. It's immaterial, but it knows everything and it feels everything. And so the more we interact with that and input that and click on those variables that increase that through self-awareness, then the more that trend begins to shift, and the more the weights go one way or the other still. But when it comes down to it, if there is a solid core that the fastest change happens of all the variables accelerating all at once, and as long as there's that core that's capable of handling the pressure, all that will do is make that core stronger, activate fully, and then expand that energy and basically experience out into everyone in the proximity, everyone in the environment. Literally like the text editor, the 4D, the script of the Choose Your Own Adventure game, or the visual, the simulation and the code, the underlying code. It's as if those 5D variables that are outside of space-time, once they get activated solidly by some event that kind of forces people into an activation, if you will, it bleeds down, if you will, and overpowers the 4D proximal probabilities that are based on basically just ignorance, deception, abuse or separation, chaos, lower animalistic behaviors, linearity, and basically automation. It's like all these non-integral aspects of existence. It's kind of the partial aspects. Sure, separation, chaos, that's what's going on here. But if you look at society, the universe, time, space, all this stuff, which is highly illusory, and you say, it's just a jumble, it's just a mess, nothing's going on there, it's just chaos. Well, you're clearly missing the point. That's the whole idea. What's really happening, the substance here, is the harmony that is to be seen. You can look at the chaos all you want, but that has nothing to do with the actual experience of being here. For instance, if it was just chaos, just harmony, you wouldn't even be able to form words. That's the whole point. And so, but what happens when the little bit of chaos, relatively, that is here, becomes compared, contrasted, connected, relative to the probabilities and possibilities of complete harmony, complete compassion, complete unification, and complete free will in the face of all of that, they melt away. That's the whole point. It doesn't have, a power against it. And I don't want to get into light and dark duality, because that's just a game. It's just another aspect of the simulation. But truth, if you will, and free will, when it's fully self-awakened and intentionally present, it can't be taken away. And so then the ideas I'm trying to say is the more stuff people are putting out there to say, chaos and disaster and distraction, deception and pain and suffering and temptation. Well, in the situation, in the system where that core group is present and you can't take away that free will and self-awareness, all that's going to do is make it stronger. And then it's going to get stronger and stronger. And then what are they going to do? We're going to be aware, be more happy, here's money for everyone. There's nothing that they could do at that point to hold people down. That's the whole point. That once that equilibrium is met, that vector equilibrium or fulcrum is achieved, there's no turning back. You can't slow it down. It's like reaching the singularity for speed, if you will, where it takes more energy to stop than it does to get up to the speed of light or something, whatever we're looking at in a medium. No, that's relative because all those are the parameters that hold a person's consciousness within what is kind of like the escape velocity of the accessing of the probabilities or possibilities that are out on the farther edge from our proximal environment or reality spectrum probability matrix. And the idea is that 0 point is connected to the far ends outside, to every other possible observer agent, and anywhere we hold in our mind, in our intention, more so our awareness, that it's within us. So it's like it's not cheat code, but it's a paradox. Meaning we can do anything as long as we accept that. Any probability, anywhere, in any aspect, any proximity to the now, we can access as long as we can imagine it. We can hold an intent, a focus, and a will towards that. I just wrote up a bunch of stuff on that. Not this 5D reality bridge post, but another one that's even like more crazier, however you want to look at it. Some people are probably going to think this is kind of crazy. This is just stuff a 14-year-old kid can come up with meditating and thinking about dimensional layers of probability and consciousness and time and how it all adds up if you get to the end of that and then go those probabilities and so on and so forth, how it's organized. And I wrote up another one after this 5D one, and it goes kind of in depth, goes more in depth than this, although it's kind of like the motivation behind this this kind of like 56-minute rant I just gave, because I have it pretty deep in my head, although for some reason now I can't come up with the main ideas of it. How to replace the physical baseline reference with the higher dimensional access point through extra dimensional awareness. Basically attaining that as a baseline, the far out reality that's not physically verified or relative to the brain and physical consciousness of the parameter set here, through extra dimensional awareness, whereas you have a physical system, and you say, okay, you have the physical system, and you're aware of the objects, okay? That means that you're in 4-dimensional access, or at least you're bridging beyond 3-dimensional. We're kind of like partially there. It's like flickering on and off a light or something. And, what is the light bulb? You can see it, right? Well, what if it was flickering on and off 50% of the time? 50% of the time on, 50% of the time off. Is it on or is it off? It looks on to us, but technically it's on and off. It's kind of like our awareness into time. And apparently that's how we look from the higher dimensions. We're kind of like flickering in and out if we get up high enough. Otherwise we're just like a shadowy ghost thing. And so, to be aware of that object, you have to be in that higher extra dimension, just time and consciousness. From that point, that's where time and consciousness coincide. To be aware of the physical environment, you have to be one step above it, because what are you, if you're aware of and observing what's below? Okay, well, you're one beyond that. So if you're aware of time, then you're in that higher, if you're aware of consciousness, if you will, in the contrast of duality from binary existence, linear existence from one moment to the next, well, then you have access to a non-dual, cyclic, expanded version, which bridges into the fifth dimension. That's the soul level, that's the pure awareness, it's the observational aspect that doesn't need consciousness, it doesn't need an identity, a reference point in the physical, in and out, a birth and a death, that doesn't need that, because it's always there. And so that's where that, it's like the outline of that, and the idea is this extra dimensional awareness, to the point where if you go from the square, the object, the physical dimension, and you're obviously conscious, if you're aware of that, then if you're aware that you're conscious and you're viewing the possibilities in time and your behavior and your personal patterns and stuff like that, the behavioral patterns, you're drawing out a storyline, then you're beyond that, and you're in a probable parallel matrix of in-between 4-dimensional realities, and at that point you'd be existing, while as you look in between each timeline or each probable existence, you'd be jumping from screen to screen in the fifth dimension, theoretically, or if we're using these words to outline that. And so then if you're looking at individual fifth-dimensional spectrums of individual possible timeline spectrums, then you're aware of You're in the sixth dimension, being aware of that fifth dimensional aspect, and you're beyond. The idea with the extra dimensional access is that you, the high dimensional access to extra dimensionality, is that you do that all the way up until you literally bounce or chase or ascend to the highest potential view, where you come to accept and realize that there is no limitation to your awareness, that you're literally the all. And so that's the basic idea of that. And it starts with literally going from here, and it's like, well, I could feel this way, or mostly people feel this way, or however you want to look at it, and feeling some way that is beyond those parameters, beyond that preconceived notion of who you are, based upon your intent, what you hold within that convergence point, your heart. And this is usually for harmony and compassion. You can do it for whatever reason, but the idea is that to do it for harmony and compassion means that you're doing it through self-awareness, because that's what this is for. When you not need to do it, although you could say when you need to do it, but for what's real, and what's real is what's eternal. What's eternal is what's not physical, what's immaterial or energetic, your true essence. And that is non-personal in the sense of desires and habits and what you think you want in this way and the other. It's beyond all that. So if you're using that to get, goods and wealth, you're not actually using that. Some program that's operating through the system, or a lower dimensional or belief system or whatever it is, or trauma or fear, is using you to do that. That's why it's like you really use it for harmony and truth. You don't use it for pleasure or material wealth or hurting somebody or something like that. It doesn't work that way. You can, but that's not you doing that, and eventually it comes back and steals your energy, and then there's no more energy. And so, use that to propel yourself beyond space-time. Check out the link. I'm going to end this here. I'll just ramble forever. This is a really interesting spree I've gone on. I started with the Randy Muggins and Emily Moyer chat, and the chats that we have tend to do this. I'm probably going to work a write-up for it, and Randy made a little blueprint type content list for that video. Was it temporal consciousness, navigating consciousness, temporal awareness? What was it called? One or the other. The new temporal perception, navigating our own consciousness. But that's the bulk of the information. All of this deals with in and out of time, extra dimensional awareness, immortality. The stuff about like the lower, basically the only thing that has to do with anything with lower is the intradimensional holographic fractal infection. That's basically it. It's that people got infected with that thing that makes them animal-like, and it entangles them into the same repeating processes, because it's basically an AI automaton system, and that this universe is pretty much infected with it to the point where it uses biological consciousness and the perceptual systems of the human, which seems to have been modified to create an imitation version of themselves, like this overbearing ego, which is kept in a mind cage based upon certain imbalances, desires, like fears, and it's just an imbalance of energy, and people's energy systems seem to be milked of the lower energy centers for that. Like it's all one big designed system, intentionally made with the purpose of using people for fuel, which I guess that's a little bit important and does go deep into that. But what's gone on, who's been where, what these groups are doing, the technology, the capabilities, goes all into the highest possibilities, and it is interesting. Now, we don't have to get lost and entangled in these possibilities. A lot of people, the basic idea is a lot of people, especially a lot of religious people, some of which are misguided, maybe more than some, I don't know, but because it can't be fear-based, but they'll say, like, all of this is kind of like devil, magic, witchcraft, whatever, hocus pocus. You only need to focus on God and the start and the end. And, well, that's the point, because the beginning and the end is within and through the convergence point, which connects and synchronizes to anything you focus on in intent. And when you align your awareness with the intent, or the connection of the fifth dimensional possibilities that go beyond the beginning and end of this temporal physical trapped realm, you are connecting to the alpha omega point and basically attaining God consciousness. You're not becoming God, but you're at one with God, the awareness. And if people get dismayed or disrupted, or basically like thrown into disarray and distracted, all these D words, through desire, temptation, creating whatever, labyrinths and endless hall of mirrors, they get lost inside that holographic fractal infection. That's the whole point. So it is true, but it's not, it's not true to look at it from a fear-based perspective and say, we don't need to know about all of this. We just need to focus on the one or the other. If you do that properly, if you focus on the truth and stay away from BS And, you know, not at that point, you're not staying away and pushing away, because that's a paradox. That's a paradox of being. If you're attaining happiness and searching for it, well, you only find suffering. If you try and push away suffering, well, you only push away suffering more. If you just be, well, then you find what you're looking for. So it's a paradox. But, you know, that's the whole thing. If you do that properly and you're like, I'm not focusing on that, I'm just focusing on me, my self-awareness, you know, growing and observing and all that, well, then you're going to do everything that I just described. You're just not going to have the same words and layout for just describing it.